Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you've been having a great week. I certainly have. It's been a wonderful experience to be with all of you and to be with all of our guests who are here from outside of North America. I do want to say a special thank you to a lot of the people who have been working behind the scenes to make things so. I know not everything has been smooth, but they have worked really hard to make sure that we can smooth things out and to attend to the details. I especially want to thank, if you've seen David Gasser around here, he's a young man who has been running around helping with all kinds of things. He's done a great job for us. Thank you, David. Also, if you haven't met Dixon, he's back there doing the sound. He has done an amazing job making sure we have great sound always. And in addition to being the sash lady, Eve Hain has also been the queen of merchandise and a lot more than that, let me tell you. She has really done a lot to make things happen. So thank you to Eve for all that you've done. And I also want to thank the tremendous staff that we have at the Hymn Society. You know, all year long, we have such a great team. We meet every week. We have a good rapport among ourselves, and it's really a pleasure to work together and to create the kinds of experiences that we're having here this week. So I want to say to Brian and Courtney and Stephen, on your behalf, thank you for all that you do. So for our centennial year, the planning team had decided it was not enough for us to focus on all the good things that have happened in North America over the past 100 years. It was really very important for us to take an outward and a forward look at where we're going and what we hope to, what God may be calling us to in the next century. So we made an effort to reach out to international organizations, international leaders, and to ask, can you come and talk with us, converse with us during this conference? And one of the events that we had planned was this roundtable conversation among leaders from various countries. So I'd like to first introduce them before we get into our conversation. At the far end is the Reverend Dr. Lisa Weaver, who is associate professor at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. And Lisa is a member of the Executive Committee of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. She was also the theological consultant for the ecumenical African American hymnal, One Lord, One Faith, One Baptism. So we're really happy to have you as part of our conversation this morning. Next to Lisa is the Reverend Dr. Mizuno Ryuichi, and Ryuichi, that's his given name, Mizuno is his family name, is a professor of Hebrew Bible in Japan. He is a minister in the United Church of Christ in Japan. And he is also an officer in the Hymn Society in Japan. So we're very pleased to have you with us. Next to Ryuichi is the Reverend Dr. Janet Wootton, who is the president of the Hymn Society in Great Britain and Ireland. She is a congregational minister, has been a professor. I think she said she's now happily retired and writing books. So we're glad to have you with us, Janet. Thank you. And we have Pastor Gerardo Oberman, who is the president of the Reformed Church in Argentina, and he is the coordinator of a network for liturgical renewal and musical renewal in Latin America called Reflector. And he comes to us from Argentina, and we are delighted to have you with us. And sitting next to me is my husband, Ray. And he is going to be the interpreter for Gerardo, who will be speaking in Spanish during our conversation today. He was formerly a church musician, but he is working as a linguist. He is a translator and interpreter in the Office of Language Services at the United States Department of State. So it's really delightful to have all of you with us. So I would like to begin our conversation by just getting a sense of what's going on in the various countries and regions that are represented here. And I wonder if we could start with Ryuichi and ask you, what are people singing in Japan? And how would you characterize the content of congregational song in Japan?
Singing in Japan is more like, I say, singing in Japan is more individualized because, karaoke, it became so popular and people sing by themselves. Even they are in the same room singing, only one person is singing and the others are not listening, they are choosing next song they are going to sing. And so outside school or church, singing together is declining in our society. And in the school education, there is a strict regulation to what to be sung, what to be taught in music classes. And so that is a common legacy for the people. What was taught during the school ages. And in Japanese congregations, people, we love to sing all the songs taught by the missionaries. First missionaries to the mainland Japan came 1853, mainly from the United States. So they taught our ancestors forebearers gospel songs with refrains from the camp meeting. So still today, Japanese Christians love to sing those old style hymns.
Okay, thank you. That's a great start. We're going to be digging into some of that as we go along. I wonder if we could go next to Janet and ask, so what's congregational song like in Europe these days?
Well, there are places that people sing with great enthusiasm and great gusto, and you can hear them for miles around, and that's the football terraces, soccer football. And yes, I come from a rugby playing family, and there they sing with great gusto, but you need a whole new vocabulary, because I learned a lot of words I never expected to know from my rugby playing relatives. Church is very different. And in many churches now in Britain and also more widely in Europe, I've been speaking to some people here. What we have is small numbers of people, small congregations singing as if they were a large congregation. So you have someone sitting there, one at the back, one ready to make the tea at the end of the service, and they're singing "And Can It Be" to Sajina, big melody, it's awful because there's so much available that could be well sung and with integrity and honor by a small group of people, and they don't feel free to experiment. They don't feel free to sing some of the material we've been singing here and to praise God in the smallness. There's nothing wrong with being a small congregation, but we have echoes in our minds of the big congregation. So it'd be good to see some of that developing.
Could you add just a word about repertoire? Ryuichi was saying that in Japan, people really love the old gospel songs. What's that like now in Europe?
People still, I can't speak throughout Europe because I haven't mentioned that particular thing, but people do love the old hymns. They don't like singing new tunes. They don't mind if the words are different. But the other thing along those lines is that the old hymns are better known in the community. So we used to run a homelessness centre. We sang the Old Rugged Cross, and all the homeless people came and gathered. They didn't want to sing, but they liked us singing. So those hymns are also hymns that reach out into the community.
Great, thank you. Well, let's move to Latin America. Gerardo, would you?
Todavía cantamos, todavía pedimos, todavía soñamos, todavía esperamos. We are still singing. Todavía cantamos.
We're still singing.
Pero esa es una buena noticia, es algo que anima. América Latina es un pueblo de música y un pueblo de canto y un pueblo de baile, un pueblo que corporiza lo que canta.
But this is a very good thing because Latin America is a singing region. It's a place that embodies song.
Se canta en las calles, se canta en las casas, se canta en los estadios, se canta en cada lugar donde uno va, hay gente cantando.
People sing in their homes, people sing in stadiums, people sing everywhere they go. Wherever you go, you can find somebody singing.
Y eso todavía sucede en las iglesias.
And this still happens in churches.
Pero estamos en un proceso de decolonizar aquello que cantamos.
But we are still in the process of decolonizing what we are singing.
Porque en nuestras iglesias lo que se canta tradicionalmente tiene mucho que ver con la herencia himnológica traída por los misioneros.
Because what we are still singing in churches still comes from the heritage that we have inherited from our missionaries.
Estamos tratando de descubrir nuestra propia voz, nuestra propia música, nuestros propios ritmos, porque hay como una disociación entre aquello que se canta en la calle, lo que se escucha cuando uno va a algún lugar público y aquello que cantamos en las iglesias.
We are still trying to find our own voice, or trying to find our own rhythms, because there's a little bit of a disconnect between what we sing in our homes, what we sing on the streets, and what we sing in our churches.
Muchos de ustedes aquí sé que han conocido a Pablo Sosa. Y Pablo Sosa fue uno de los pioneros en incorporar música popular dentro de los templos, dentro de las iglesias.
Perhaps many of you may know the composer Pablo Sosa, and Pablo Sosa was a leader in being able to incorporate our song in churches and a popular song.
And you know Pablo Sosa is a fellow of the Hymn Society.
Sí.
Yes.
Él era miembro de la sociedad, sí. Y lo que estamos tratando en nuestra red de liturgia en América Latina es animar a las iglesias a incorporar los ritmos populares y las melodías tradicionales de sus contextos en la liturgia, en las celebraciones de cada semana.
And what we're trying to do within our network is to animate, to encourage the incorporation of these songs in our liturgy.
Good. Thank you so much. I wonder if we could swing back to North America. And Lisa, could you talk a little bit about that for us?
I sit at the intersection of the academy and the church. And so as a seminary teacher, there are things that we are doing and goals that we have. And in the church, there are things that we're singing. The church will be the easiest first. We are still singing hymns. What I am grateful for is to still see in the Black church context broadly. We are still singing hymns, and that is also being accompanied by, if you will, contemporary songs by amazing worship leaders and young people. So we are grateful for that. My primary vocational context is the academy, and so I serve at a Presbyterian seminary, which is a little more than 50% Presbyterian. And we also have the other Protestant traditions as well. Occasionally, we will have someone from the Roman Catholic Anglican Communion. And so the goal, at least our goal as music professors, as a worship professors with my colleague, Dr. Rebecca Spurrier, is that one of the things for me, especially the language I like to use is liturgical literacy. And so while we are a Presbyterian seminary, we honor and regard that Presbyterian heritage. And because almost 50% of our student body is from different ecclesial contexts, different ethnic contexts, different countries. We have a big Korean constituency, a significant African constituency. It is important that the music reflect those traditions that we have and that we move beyond, because one of the goals, at least in terms of the classes I teach, is I tell students that it is important to be liturgically literate and ecumenically hospitable. And so it requires that we, or I at least invite them to consider songs and to look at what is the theological lens through which this community sings, and to acknowledge those touch points. And so it is in some ways a musical lab, if you will, because of the breadth that we try to expose them to, because the world is smaller. And when they go out, the statistical probability is even greater that many people will encounter at least one ecumenical context. And they need to be literate and be able to be hospitable to go out and to come in.
Great, thank you. One of the things I heard as we were going around is the issue of decolonization and the legacy of colonialism. We're going to get to that in a moment. But before we do that, I also heard some of you reflect on resistance to some things that are new, that people are holding on to things, whether it's the colonial legacy or just old things. I wonder if you could just say a word about that, each of you, about the resistance to new things. Who'd like to? Janet, would you like to start?
I think people regard the church as somewhere where they should be able to feel safe. And part of that is a rather sad hankering after the past. When we come to talk about colonialization and decolonialization, it is something that white Britain particularly seriously needs to face and needs to take very seriously with regard to our history and the future. And so for us, I think the holding on to what is past has deeper resonances, unhealthy resonances that we need to face and deal with.
Can I sharpen the question just a little bit and ask, what are people not singing that they need to be singing, that they should be singing? Could you say something about that?
This isn't across the board, because there are lots of good examples of good practice, but there's quite a resistance to singing material from other cultures. And again, I would like to dig into what lies behind that. So singing words from other cultures, musical styles from other cultures. We've got a wonderful resource in the UK from Scotland, the Iona community, Wild Goose Publications. Wonderful songs of liberation, justice, social justice, liberation theologies, lament for the world in which we live, the longing for transformation, really powerful, good material. And that is set to folk melodies that people do sing, and we do sing those things.
Para mí la pregunta que surge al escuchar lo que Janet está diciendo y en respuesta a la pregunta es si nuestras comunidades de fe tienen que ser espacios confortables para las personas que participan o lugares donde las personas que participan son desafiadas desde el Evangelio.
So the question that comes to mind when I'm listening to you speak into the question that was asked is, are our communities of faith places that ought to be comfortable spaces or places in which our communities are challenged by the gospel?
Porque creo que mucho de lo que sucede es que buscamos espacios donde sentirnos bien, con lo que nos gusta cantar. Y eso tiene que ver mucho con nuestra herencia, con nuestra propia tradición.
Because I think our spaces are places where we sing what we want to sing and places where we like to feel safe.
Pero lo que se necesita desde el Evangelio es desafiar a las personas de fe a través del canto y a través de la liturgia para asumir el compromiso cristiano en un mundo quebrado y lastimado y caído en manos de ladrones.
Because what we need to do is we need to be challenged by the words of the gospel
Through song and liturgy.
And also through song and through liturgy, in order to bring that message to the world.
Could you say something about the content of these songs? I mean, are people singing songs that are meaty enough, rich enough?
Bueno, algunos himnos tienen buena teología, pero una teología que responde a su propio contexto. El contexto en el que vivimos ahora necesita nuevas cosas, necesita nuevas palabras, nuevas letras, cuestiones de género, de justicia social, derechos humanos.
Our songs need renewal. They need to respond to questions of social justice, gender identity,
Bueno, justicia social, género, derechos humanos,
human rights,
LGBTQI+.
the LGBTQ communities. That's what our songs need to be reflecting.
Great, thank you. Ryuichi, how about in Japan?
Speaking of colonization, Japan is a quite ambiguous country because as I said earlier, that Western culture came to Japan and westernized us. So you see, I'm wearing these kinds of clothes every day, not traditional clothes. And speaking of the hymns, missionaries taught us their songs. So 90% of current hymn book is translation, and mainly from the English and the German. But at the same time, we colonized Asian countries during World War II. I have to mention this because here is Taiwanese friends. Japan occupied Taiwan for long years. And so that kind of repentance must be sung in a new song. And you can find in that small songbook, let us realize. Christ help us to realize. It's a kind of a repentance song against what we did to the Asian people.
You know, one of our colleagues in Japan gave a webinar for the Hymn Society during the past year and introduced us to some very powerful texts that made us all cringe a little bit because they were so, just so plain spoken. Like there was one, I think it was, I hate my mother, right? I mean, that was very, very wrenching. So I guess I'm wondering, to what extent are those kinds of things being accepted in Japan and used in churches?
Well, as my colleagues here has spoken, the comfortableness is still a key word to Japanese congregation too. And pastors, in their pastoral concern, try to be comfortable to their members, do not challenge the congregational members singing new challenging hymns or speaking challenging sermons. Well, those kind of challenging, new, powerful songs are not popular. Some accept, but no.
Yeah. Lisa, how do you think we're doing in North America with singing things that are challenging to the status quo?
Overall, I think we're in the same space in terms of the resistance to challenge. But there's some points I wanted to make as I was listening, is that, Janet, you talk about the safety and the familiarity, the comfort, particularly in crisis. We want to sing what we know, what is familiar in text and or tune. And if I'm thinking in terms of from a liturgical pastoral standpoint, part of the liturgy, part of the function of the liturgy is didactic. And so it teaches people and it forms people. And it's supposed to make you uncomfortable. I mean, I think that is something that we have been misformed in, is that church is supposed to make you comfortable. It's not. And that we hold in tension this thing. If you ask anyone to say, do you believe that God is alive? Yes. Do you believe that God is a creative God? Yes. Do you believe that God is ever creating? Yes. So why are you holding on to a hymn like an idol, right? Because sometimes our preferences become idolatrous, right? And so there's the tension between the fluid and dynamic God that wants you to grow and congregants who are resistant. And so part of that, I think, is a teaching moment to hold those in tension, right? Tradition is something we stand on and don't throw out. Some things don't apply today. But there's a pastoral, liturgical, musical way in which I think leaders are to gently push, that we don't leave our people in their complacency, but we don't drag them like bulls through a china shop, right? So that's one thing. In terms of how what we're singing now, also when we talk about we want to sing what we know, we have to look at that ecumenically and historically, right? Because there was a time when we sang everything, it was personal piety, it was about our personal holiness. And so social justice was the concern of the other tradition or someone else. Now we are coming into a season where we understand more robustly that the gospel calls all of us to both and not either or. And so in various places on the spectrum, we are challenged to open the camera lens, if you will, for people and say, no, it's also this, right? We also have to do the inside and the outside work. The other thing in terms of what we're singing now, there's more attention to the vertical and horizontal. Like sometimes we are singing to each other and God is just listening. Other times we are singing to God and not really in tune with the people around us. And so there's more of a balancing. We're paying more attention to that, the vertical and the horizontal and the I, we. And so, yeah, I think there are places where we are still stuck, but I do see movement. I do see us moving in a more robust and ecumenic and a broader manner.
Quisiera contar una historia que tiene que ver con el beneficio de la persistencia.
I would like to share a story that deals with talking about the benefits of being persistent.
Porque muchos pastores y pastoras y músicos se desilusionan cuando la congregación o cuando la comunidad no incorpora nuevas canciones.
Because many pastors become disillusioned when the community does not incorporate new songs.
En la congregación en la que fui pastor en los años 90, había una persona que solo gustaba cantar himnos.
The community where I was a pastor during the 90s, there was this one person who only wanted to sing hymns.
Y cuando se cantaba alguna canción nueva, él tomaba el cancionero y lo tiraba fuertemente sobre el banco para demostrar su disconformidad.
And when we had to sing a new song, he would take the hymnal and he would bang it down on the pew to show his discontent.
Domingo tras domingo durante 2 o 3 años.
Sunday after Sunday for about 2 or 3 years.
Pero un día falleció su yerno de una manera muy trágica.
But one day, his son-in-law died in a very tragic way.
Y para su funeral, él pidió cantar una canción que estaba en el cancionero que él constantemente tiraba sobre su banco.
And then for his funeral, he requested that a song be sung that was in that hymnal that he would so strongly throw down on the pew.
Una canción que ha sido traducida al español, que es de otro contexto, quizá ustedes conocen. No tengas miedo, hay señal secreta, un nombre que te ampara cuando vas.
It's a song that you may know in another context. Do not be afraid. There's no other secret.
O sea, la persistencia tiene su beneficio.
What it goes to show is that persistence has its benefits.
Take the long view, right? I think we can swing around to the colonialism issue because I think all of you mentioned it in one way or another in your own context, how it has an influence on singing in your region or country, and also in your relationship to the rest of us. So who'd like to start with that? Gerardo, why don't you talk about colonialism and what's...
Bueno, ya mencionamos hace un momento que hay una veta colonial que nos llega a través de los misioneros que traen un evangelio, generalmente norteamericano, aunque también han venido desde Inglaterra misioneros, pero que tienen una fuerte impronta colonial.
So what we've already mentioned is that there has been this colonialistic wave that came mainly from Great Britain, but it's also come from other European sources.
Pero con lo que estamos luchando ahora es también con otra veta colonial que proviene de las nuevas propuestas musicales del mercado religioso.
But now what we are facing is another type of colonialistic wave that comes from new type of church music, new type of sacred music.
Entonces, en América Latina hay como una suerte de movimiento de pinzas.
And so we have in Latin America, it's kind of like the movement within a pair of pliers.
Por un lado, la tradición hímnica y por el otro lado, la nueva música de los nuevos movimientos religiosos.
So on one side of the pliers, we have the traditional hymns, and on the other side of the pliers, we have the new type of music that is now starting to...
Cuando hablo de nuevo tipo de música religiosa, hablo de esta música que uno va a Japón, o va a Australia, o a Estados Unidos, o a América Latina, y escucha la misma música con el mismo contenido.
And what I'm speaking about, this type of new music, is the type of music that you can go to Japan, you can go to the United States, you can go to other parts of the world, and it's the same type of music that you're hearing all over the place.
Y estamos tratando de luchar contra esas dos vetas colonialistas para buscar y encontrar nuestra propia voz.
So what we're trying to do is to press against those two type of colonialistic forces to find our own voice.
So we have sort of the old colonialism and the new colonialism. Huh? I wonder if there's a similar experience in Japan. I saw you nodding your head.
Okay, about the new colonialism, yesterday you saw the short meter video as my colleague Mickey presented. You saw that music quite similar to contemporary worship music in music style and vocabulary. So as Gerardo spoken, that is a kind of new colonialism, I'm afraid. And I do not blame the students because they are usually listening to those kind of music, always. And old type of colonialism, we are still struggling to avoid is it too strong? Maybe. Avoid old good old style hymns out of hymn book and put new hymns like Born in a Hymn Explosion. People's reaction is, my old favorite song was lost from the hymn book.
You know, when I think about popular culture and how the music of North America and Europe has sort of become commodified all around the world, you know, like you turn on BTS from South Korea, it sounds just like a boy band from Los Angeles, right? So I guess I wonder if there's a parallel kind of influence from the West into the various cultures of the world, and also in worship music, modified. Would anybody else like to pick up on that? No? Janet, what's your take?
I do know that as I have traveled around, I've sung What a Friend We Have in Jesus in many cultures, and now as I travel around, I sing Majesty. So there's wave upon wave of influence, and it extends further back than that, because these are songs, as we've been saying, that don't challenge, they're individualized. And what I've been discovering in researching for the sectional I did, and also for other things, is that is not accidental, because any power structure wants to pacify the people it rolls over, and therefore it will destroy or repress indigenous music and culture, and it will individualize, because if you can make each person separate from the others, then people will not organize and they won't see corporate justice. And can I say this? It's very, very old tradition. We heard yesterday from Hillsong, a song based on the Creed, deliberately saying, oh, we will bring the Creed. And what does the Creed say? I believe in Jesus Christ, who was born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. Now, what happened in between those two events? The whole ministry and teaching of Jesus is excised. Why? Because another empire didn't want people listening to Jesus. Because if they did, if they read those parts of the Bible, therefore they kept the Bible away from people in vernacular languages. And if they read those parts of the Bible, they will understand that it's a world-transforming gospel, not just an individual gospel.
Amen.
So I believe that there's something much more powerful going on here.
So Lisa, do you see the effects of colonialism in North America?
Am I a black woman in America?
Can we just call that a setup?
Right, we are always looking at ways in which, subtly and not so subtly, there are these things which would diminish the humanity of others, right? And so we're always attentive to the use of dark and black as evil. Like there's a hymn, I couldn't call it yesterday, but Jesus Shall Reign. And the tension of how you address language changes in texts to equalize humanity, to give equal regard. And sometimes the solution for some might be to pull a verse out of a hymn. That's not always a solution because you sometimes destroy the narrative of it, especially if it's just, so you have to be careful about that. But there's one hymn that I remember, particularly in my context, Jesus Shall Reign. And it was verse 3, the second part, I think, of verse 3. As Western empires own their Lord, savage tribes attend his word. And we never sang it for obvious reasons, right? So we attend to those things that in the American context speak to, address, indict America's original sin of enslavement, right, in the slaveocracy. And that kind of sensitivity gets extended to other kinds of hegemonic or oppressive kinds of language. So it extends to women, it extends to gender, it extends now to ableism. Again, my colleague, Dr. Rebecca Spurrier, whose specialty is in disability now, has challenged me, and I'm struggling with Amazing Grace. How do we retune it? I once was blind and now I see.
Yeah.
And there's a book out, can't remember the author, it says, My Disability is Not a Prayer. That oftentimes the church is praying for people to be healed from something from which science says, right? Like this is a lifetime condition. And so to even the way we look at disability, right, is a kind of hegemony of the abled. And so we're always being attentive to language and how to shift that and to call for people to present creative solutions linguistically.
So how are you addressing colonialism in your various contexts? What are you doing about that?
We just don't sing some stuff. We're just not going to sing it. We're just not going to sing it. We're just not going to sing it.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is this. Clearly, hymns have carried the colonial effort forward, right? I mean, and so how can the worship of the church and the hymns we sing carry decolonialism forward?
El gran desafío es encontrar un lenguaje contracultural.
The greatest challenge is finding a countercultural language.
Cuando las primeras comunidades cristianas dijeron que Jesús era Kyrios,
When the first Christian communities declared that Jesus was the Kyrios,
en su momento fue un desafío contracultural a quien se denominaba a sí mismo Kyrios y Señor.
During that time, it was a great challenge to those who defined themselves as the Kyrios.
Y hoy hay que encontrar un lenguaje que desafíe a quienes se sienten los señores o las señoras del mundo.
And now the challenge is to find a language that does not define
Yeah.
the challenge. The challenge is those people who think that they are the great lords and ladies of the world.
Yeah. Ese creo que es un camino que la Iglesia necesita urgentemente encontrar para desafiar a todos los poderes que quieren imponer su lenguaje, imponer su música, imponer su estilo. No solo en la Iglesia, en el mundo, pero desde la Iglesia debemos encontrar ese mensaje contracultural.
We need to find within the church that countercultural message to counter those that want to impose their thought, impose their opinions.
Their music, their opinions, their lyrics, their geology,
Their geology,
whatever.
everything.
How about in Japan? How are you addressing this?
That's a very serious question, but not because Japanese Christians are not aware of colonization. Mostly, that they are colonized by Christianity, Western Christianity, or they colonized the Asian people. We say they are not aware that we colonized the Asian people. So the first thing we should do is to recognize these facts, I suppose. And speaking of the words, the Lord, curios, and I'm try to not use curios in my own liturgy or my own text. It's a Japanese shu, just one syllable, and it's quite a usable word to translate Lord to shu. It's quite, because in Japanese language, for example, God is translated kami, 2 syllables. So if you want to translate English songs into Japanese, twice or 3 times words are required. So shu, the Lord, is a very convenient word to convey the meaning, but that it has such kind of connotation. And I regret that to helping to translate the morning liturgy, I use the shu because that is written in the Bible. So once I thought this should be rewritten to kami, but I decided not to detach from the original text. And the people in Japan, as I said earlier, that love to old things. So that kind of imaginary wording is still very strong among people. So if shu, the Lord, is not used, I don't know how they will react.
Yeah. And part of the response, I think, is also to use the new hymns, right? And use new texts and things that people are writing, that hymn writers are writing and songwriters are writing, and use them judiciously, theologically, and pastorally. And to hold in tension when one uses music from a particular historical and ethnic context. I'm thinking of enslaved songs, right? Where there is, and we understand politically why we want to avoid Lord and Master, but we need to also understand contextually that when enslaved Africans and African Americans sang Master, that was to say, you are not the master, but that God is master. So that there are times when to change the language from a specific cultural and historical context undermines what the text itself is doing. So even while we look at new hymns, we employ a judicious use of particular kinds of songs and context for historical and theological integrity.
That's great. Now, all of you have sort of focused on language as a way of dealing with this. And I was wondering, Martin's talk on Monday, he was talking about how music is integral to the worship. The music itself is integral to the worship. And I'm wondering the extent to which music and musical style also has an impact from colonialism and in responding to colonialism.
Yeah.
Anybody want to address that?
In Japan, Christianity is considered as Western, especially American religion. And so using our own indigenous scale rhythm is thought not to be Christian. Very old style understanding, but the people still think so. So it is quite difficult to bring our own scale, our own harmony to music, hymn singing.
That is really interesting. Many of us know Saya Ojiri, who just finished her doctorate in Toronto, and I recall her saying that when she was going back to Japan and trying to introduce indigenous instruments and indigenous styles, that there was resistance because so many Japanese Christians had come to connect the style of music with Christianity itself, that somehow there was something integral about the relationship between that music and Christian faith. Is that kind of what you're...
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hace unos años atrás fuimos para una asamblea de la Iglesia Reformada en África.
A few years ago, we went to an assembly of the Reformed churches in Africa.
Y para el culto inaugural, alguien que va desde otro contexto a África espera encontrar algo de la cultura africana en el servicio.
And so at the opening worship service, somebody from another culture coming into this would expect to find elements of African culture in the liturgy.
Y nos encontramos con un órgano y música solo de himnos.
And what we found was an organ and only hymns
En África.
in Africa.
Ok, eso sucede también, o ha sucedido también en América Latina, pero estamos en un proceso de transformación para incorporar instrumentos autóctonos, música autóctona, ritmos autóctonos en nuestras liturgias.
That's also happening in Latin America, but we're trying to find ways of incorporating our own instruments, our own type of musical expressions into our liturgy.
Así que si quieren escuchar un Padre Nuestro en versión de tango, vengan a nuestro workshop.
So if you would like to hear an Our Father in a tango version, come to our workshop.
If I could, I'm sorry, just before I just wanted to say something related to what Gerardo was saying, that and originally when we were forming this panel, we had intended to include a representative from Nigeria, and the Nigerians were not able to get here. And if any of you are watching, I just want to let you know that we noticed that in Nigeria, there's been a project to create an online hymnal that was fostered in relationship with Baylor University. And there was a workshop on it, I believe, yesterday, Monique Ingalls, with the Nigerians. And it's so interesting that a hymnal is just like what you all are talking about, a lot of gospel hymns from Western tradition plus indigenous stuff. So they're dealing with exactly the same kinds of issues there. I'm sorry, Elisa.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. We are talking about how we decolonize music, and we're talking about music in text and words. And to speak to the point about Algeria, she's saying that her resistance that she received to trying to introduce, things that are culturally resonant in her context. What we often don't talk about when we talk about decolonizing is decolonizing our minds. Because colonialism has taught us that the Western instrumentation and song and form and text is right, is better, is fill in the blank, and everything else is substandard. So there's this very subconscious way in which we think in order for it to be right or good, it can't be ours. That's a decolonization that really has to happen as well, so that communities can begin to see that the djembe is equally regarded by God as the drums, right? And so that we see even our instrumentation, but there's some cognitive work that needs to be done in decolonizing as well.
If I can take this on into a culture that I know reasonably well in Syria and Lebanon, where there's a very ancient Christian tradition, much more ancient than anything that exists in Europe and the West, and ancient traditional churches which use ancient traditional styles of music. And then in the 19th century, European missionaries took European hymns, and so there are churches that use that idiom And more recently, there have been a lot of American and Korean missionaries who are bringing American-style hymns. And this sort of thing happens, that there's now a tension not between ancient traditions that were pre-Christian or non-Christian, that it's Christians feeling that Western musical traditions are better, even though we're coming from technically the same faith. Now that's very badly put, and there's all sorts of lion traps in there that I'm sorry about. But it's a very, very complex world, and I agree with you about decolonizing of minds and decolonizing of the structures. We're living under the shadow of all this colonial structure for 200 and more years. There's a vast unpicking of the academic disciplines, of sciences, of politics, of geographical, geopolitical structures. And hymnody is right there in the middle of it, because it was so powerful in the 18th and 19th century, and still with American music.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, but before we do that, I did want to give each of you a chance, very briefly, if there's one more thing that you would have liked to have said at this gathering, what would that be?
Creo que este tipo de espacios son muy necesarios para discutir temas muy profundos. Por ejemplo, ¿quién tiene el derecho de decidir qué se canta y qué no se canta en las iglesias? ¿Y qué música es apropiada? ¿O qué temas son apropiados para ser cantados en las iglesias?
I think this type of gathering is a very important space where we can discuss important issues, especially who is worthy of deciding what we sing in church and what the issues are, what type of music that we sing in church. Who is worthy of doing that?
Por eso animo a que estas discusiones y estos espacios se sigan manteniendo para develar ese misterio.
And because of that, I would like to encourage these type of spaces to continue to flourish so that we can discuss these issues.
Janet?
Here we are. Can we do this together? It's a serious, complex piece of work, and we are practitioners and experts in this room. Can we do it together in the future?
Amen. Richie?
Despite I said earlier that the music of the traditional Japanese one is not no more ours, because we have to learn and we have to be taught, we have to be trained to do so. So Western scale and harmony are ours. This must be our starting point. So what to be sung in words? What to be reclaimed to be ours in words and not in music? Maybe it's not the time to revive the traditional music, but we should think about the words.
Thank you. Lisa, you get the last word.
That as leaders, we have to steward the people into singing the world that God imagines.
Amen to that. In preparation for this conversation, we had 3-hour-long Zoom meetings that included not only the people you see on the stage, but probably a dozen others from around the world. And it's been quite a process. There was so much that we talked about in those sessions that we didn't get to this morning.
No time for copyright.
We didn't get time. Copyright was a very large one, and of course, Brian's been shepherding a whole project of conversations around the issues of copyright, and that will continue. But there are 5 organizations, formal organizations represented here, in addition to ours. Mars and HSGBI and YAHA. We also have the Red Clarete and the Hymn Society in Japan. And we met together yesterday, leaders, to talk about how we're going to continue to collaborate. And so I think that the kinds of things you're talking about, that we're going to keep open spaces to reflect together, work together, and build on what we've done here. So thank you so much to all of you for being with us.